Welcome to our webinar today, everyone. We're going to be discussing the latest NCUA compliance requirements for credit unions under the new Information Security Program, or ISE for short. For those of you who might not know us, we've been assisting credit unions with cybersecurity compliance since our founding in 2004, and we're also CUNA's exclusive alliance provider for cybersecurity services. Our speaker today is Jason Kirby, one of our senior information security analysts with over a decade of industry experience. He's been with Trace Security for 5 years, focusing on our IT audit and risk assessment services. And he's going to go ahead and get into our new NCUA requirements and our recommended services for compliance. And I am going to be sharing the NCUA compliance document with everyone in the chat so that if you want to download that and follow along with us, you can. Otherwise, you can we'll send it out along with everything at the end, and it's just going to include the compliance statement numbers that link to specific services that you need to complete this year, just if you want to follow along that way.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marissa, for that introduction. So to begin, as many of you may know, credit unions have been regulated since 1970 by the NCUA, the National Credit Union Administration. These regulations have continued to grow and change as you implement new and evolving technologies for your credit union's operations. Over the years, we've seen a consistent lowering of the asset size threshold for who the NCUA considers to be small credit unions. And that's true again for this new instance of ISE, of the ISE program. Some of the new requirements that we may be looking at for the cybersecurity assessment program, or the ISE program, a lot of these things you may already be doing, which is really great news. And the new program seeks to assess and verify a credit union's information security program, and the program seeks to utilize a risk-based approach to examine credit unions. A list of those risks are available on your screen right now. Please note that while we will be discussing many services that Trace Security can provide in order to help you become in compliance with the ISE program, this is also not a sales webinar, and additionally, some of the risks Trace Security may not provide services which will help you become in compliance with those, such as credit risk or interest rate risk. Okay, so the objectives of the assessment program are to examine and verify on a periodic basis a credit union's information security program. And those include evaluating management's ability to recognize, assess, monitor, and manage information systems and technology-related risks, assessing whether the credit union has sufficient expertise to adequately plan, direct, and manage information systems and technology operations, determining whether the board of directors has adopted and implemented adequate information systems and technology-related policies and procedures, and evaluating the adequacy of internal information systems and technology controls and oversight to safeguard member information. To simplify those, that would be administrative controls, technical controls, governance controls, and annual audit and risk assessments for the 4 bullet points. Okay, the primary resources that we are going to be looking at for the ISE program, the first one listed here at the ncua.gov website is the ISE program itself, which actually lists the 4 sub-links within that single web page at the top, or that link at the top. The FFIEC IT Examination Handbook would be the next link at ithandbook.ffiec.gov. This is the primary framework used for auditing and risk assessments, which are provided by Trace Security. The Automated Cybersecurity Evaluation Toolbox. This link is, this resource is utilized to assess the maturity level of credit unions. There are some times where folks do get this tool mixed up with a risk assessment. It is not. It is a maturity assessment. The Examiner's Guide, which is a financial-based framework for evaluating credit union risk. This would be a toolbox that would not typically be seen in trade security assessments as outlined previously with the two different risk examples that I provided. And finally, the National Supervision Policy Manual, or the NSPM. This is an oversight and supervisory guides, which includes information security examination policies and procedures. Okay. The ICE program itself is broken up into two categories of examinations. The primary factor behind deciding which two of these programs that you may want to utilize for your examination program is the asset size of your credit union. Less than $50 million in assets would be the Small Credit Union Examination Program, or SCOOP. And the core examination program is over 50 million in assets with a minimum set of requirements. Now, in both the SCOOP and core examination programs, you can also look to see or if you have performed an ACIT review on your credit union, what your maturity level may look like to help you in deciding which one of these two, rather than letting your asset size be the hard and fast determination of which one that you would go with. Additionally, there is a Core Plus section, which may include some additional requirements that are applicable or required by your examiner, or maybe again that you may feel that you can go ahead and utilize to evaluate your credit union in order to understand with greater detail your information security program, especially if you've already found that all of your information security testing has been coming back with, let's say, no findings or no issues. And once again, the Small Credit Union Examination Program, also known as SCOOP, is typically for credit unions which are below $50 million in assets. The requirements for a SCOOP program, or the roadmap, if you will. As you can see on this slide, there are statement numbers which are listed out to the side, and everything that we have listed on this slide and any of the subsequent slides for roadmaps have those statement numbers referenced to those handouts again that were just previously provided to you. These services that Trace Security can provide will help you become in compliance with the ICE program, or in this case, the SCOOP program within the ICE program. And again, many of these things, a lot of you folks may already be performing within your credit union. So a small institution risk assessment, a small institution IT audit, a small institution network assessment, which includes a vulnerability assessment and external penetration test, security awareness training, which encompasses trace education videos and quizzes, remote social engineering, and we recommend for your social engineering for the phishing to phish on 100% of your employees and also participate in the phishing exercise, but that one can be reduced down to only 10% of employees. And finally, disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan tabletop test. Also, please note that any services which are denoted with an asterisk should be or must be completed by an independent or third-party organization. And for the core examination program, once again, this is for credit unions which are over 50 million in assets. The suggested services for compliance, and I believe this is broken up into two different slides, are the risk assessment. And again, this is where we will call back to a previous slide where we have the FFIEC as our framework. And this is also where we begin to break out based on maturity or even sub-asset sizes internally within Trace Security for Tier 1, Tier 2, or even Tier 3 risk assessment. And again, it's based on asset size and complexity. Sometimes we may refer to complexity as maturity. IT audit, again, Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. And again, that's based on asset size and complexity. Vulnerability assessment, authenticated or unauthenticated vulnerability management software for monthly scans. And I would like to also denote that there is a difference between vulnerability scans and a full vulnerability assessment, which is why we call out for the monthly scans. An external penetration test. And an external penetration testing may get expanded based on your asset size in addition to internal penetration testing. And to continue on with the core examination program, just as with the SCOOP program, Security Awareness Training, which may include trace education videos and quizzes. But we also have added on to this the suggestion or the requirement of completing on-site or remote security awareness training. The remote security awareness training or on-site security awareness training is recommended to be annual. Remote social engineering, again, 100% of employees for the phishing exercise and 10% of employees for the vishing exercise. Additionally, the disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan tabletop testing. And I'd like to touch briefly here with the tabletop testing. The tabletop testing, for anyone who may have never participated in a tabletop test, is just a roundtable discussion of any and all recovery plan team members, department heads, or managers. And it is to make sure that management is aware of the processes and procedures to be performed during recovery. So additional requirements for Core Plus. And again, I would like to remind everyone that all we have done is just add on to the previous list of core into this Core Plus listing. So anything that we saw within the core section is also going to apply within the Core Plus section with only a few of these additional requirements. And remember that the larger, more complex that your credit union gets, the more your examiner is going to expect of your cybersecurity program and indeed of leadership or management. And within the Core Plus additional requirements is the quarterly vulnerability assessments, which again are increased from the annual requirement from Core. Remote social engineering to include now a smishing testing. I would like to remind anyone that smishing testing would be the text message testing, where the vishing exercises are phone, and hopefully everyone does know that phishing exercises are via email. Web application testing or API testing, wireless assessment and penetration testing. And I would like to make sure that everyone is aware that when we say penetration testing within this category, we do mean the wireless penetration testing and nothing additional to internal or external penetration testing that was previously mentioned. A VPN configuration review and remote access assessment. And once again, and with the previous slides, anything marked as an asterisk is recommended or required to be completed by an independent or third-party organization. Additionally, within Core Plus program, we have a password audit, firewall configuration review, a physical security review or clean desk review, and a ransomware preparedness assessment. This is also the ransomware preparedness assessment, which may be able to be completed remotely by the CISA ransomware self-assessment. And the compliance roadmaps. And to make things easier for you, we have developed cybersecurity roadmaps, which have already been shared via the chat for services that will keep you and your credit union in compliance with these new ISE requirements. And just to make sure that we have left plenty of time, we have now reached the section for answering any questions.
You guys can keep adding questions to the chat and we'll start going through them just as in the order that we got them in. So one of the questions that we got was so risk assessments, do they need to be performed by someone like Trade Security for the core exam?
I'm sorry, risk assessments are not performed by Trace for core exam. That was the question?
Yes, they want to know, like, do they have to have a third-party risk assessment at the core level?
Yes, risk assessments are required at the core level.
They don't have to be performed by a third party. You can perform them in-house, but Trade Security does have services that can assist with that as well.
Additionally, there is also a risk assessment review service that Trade Security offers to review your risk assessment that was performed and ensure that at least that you are reviewing for things that typically Trade Security would look for in a risk assessment, and an information security risk assessment, I should state.
Someone asked just to make sure the asset size for the scoop section is less than 50 million assets, and that is correct. That is the new NCUA update for this year. That to be considered small, you have to be less than 50 million in assets, which is the smallest threshold that they have ever had before. Someone asked, what date does the NCUA start using the new ISE requirements? You want to take that?
This is Jude Jennifer. I've been told by some of our clients that they are already being brought to the attention of ICE as early as February. There has been some leniency if there aren't firm plans in place to meet the ICE requirements, but it is something that is being brought up to the credit unions that are being examined as early as February.
Okay, yeah, so someone asked if their exam period is May of 22 to April of 23, do you think they would get under the new requirements, or do you think that would apply to their next exam?
I believe that they would be asked for these things in their next in their upcoming exam, and if they didn't have a solution in place to meet those requirements, they would have some sort of written recommendation or finding around that.
And how often should disaster recovery tabletop exercise be conducted? Should it be annually?
I typically recommend annual for tabletop testing, yes. I would also consider the size and complexity or maturity of the organization into that judgment. And along with that, any thoughts on practical testing in addition to tabletop testing? For instance, if I'm considering, because I think we just listed tabletop testing for both Scoop and Core. For a Scoop, we might just be looking at just tabletop testing, whereas within Core, we may be looking at wanting to do practical tests. Now, that is, again, a service that Trade Security would not provide. We cannot come in and do a practical failover test of your organization, but it is something that we would look for documentation-wise in an audit or a risk assessment.
Okay, and someone asked if you could describe the difference between an audit and a risk assessment.
Yes, absolutely. In Trade Security's terms, a risk assessment is going to be a discussion between the client and the analyst, such as myself, and where we would go through each control and you would describe to me how that control is currently being implemented. Much more of a management awareness type of assessment. And not only that, but within those assessments, we're looking at the confidentiality, integrity, and availability and probability of a given threat and how the controls tie to those threats. And we assign a given risk level to those threats, an inherent risk level. After we answer all of those controls in whatever fashion that we do, implemented, not implemented, so forth, then those controls reflect back on those threats to either reduce the risk or I don't want to necessarily say increase the risk, but not reduce the risk. Those lead out to a residual risk value, and that is the basis of the report, is centered around the residual risk for the identified threats. Whereas an audit is mostly controlled focused and does not really reflect back onto the risks. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Someone asked if that tabletop exercise has to be completed by a third party.
I would definitely always recommend third party, just because we can help to eliminate bias or anything within the discussion or review or assessment that we may be talking about. Now, if you're a large institution that has their own compliance and audit and risk department or departments with a separate reporting structure and no ties to what is being reviewed from a organizational standpoint, then you may be okay to hold that tabletop testing in-house. But as with anything with audit and risk assessment and compliance, again, we want to make sure that we're removing that bias as much as we can within our assessments.
As of right now, the NCUA will allow you to do those yourself in-house, but like I said, like Jason said, there's a little bit less room for error when you have a third party view over it. Does Trace Security recommend a password management system? I'm not sure if they're asking in general or if they're asking for like a specific product there.
I actually get this question pretty much every English speaking engagement that I go to. Yes and no. We need to make sure that the security for that password keeping system is just as strict, if not stricter, than any of our other passwords. Obviously, we want to make sure that our complexity requirements are being met and so forth, but we 100% need to make sure that we have two-factor authentication into that password keeping tool for general access, changing passwords or accessing passwords within that password keeping database. So do I necessarily recommend it or not recommend it? I'm actually just rather middle of the road. I wouldn't recommend it nor not recommend it at the same time, but those are my suggestions if you do use one. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Is a wireless assessment required when the wireless network is internet only, meaning no corporate access or no corp access?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, is a wireless assessment required when the wireless network is internet only, meaning no corp access?
I would say more than likely not. We're saying that it is purely guest. It only exists to provide guests access to the internet. It is completely isolated from the network. It is what we might call air gapped from the corporate network. And I mean, it solely exists on maybe even its own set of lines. There is no physical nor logical overlap of the wireless network to the corporate network. In a case like that, I would say, no, you probably don't need to worry about it because for all intents and purposes, your wireless network does not exist for the corporate environment. And that's mostly what we're talking about is for the corporate environment. You're more so at that point providing the same type of service that say Starbucks would. And there is no regulatory requirements for Starbucks providing basic internet service for their customers. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. How many of the tools are available in our Trace Security CSO software? So I guess they're asking what can they use in CSO to meet some of these requirements?
I do know that the vulnerability scanning tool is available within Trace Security CSO. Although I'm not 100% on much else on the technical side, I mostly am a risk and compliance type person. So the technical tools I don't really have a day-to-day interaction with in any way. I think the policy developer is in there, but that's not, I think, anything necessarily also to do with this ICE requirements. So I don't know if I 100% understand the question at the same time.
Okay. Someone asked more specifically, do we offer the vulnerability software for monthly scanning?
Yes, yes, that for 100% for certain, Trace Security does provide vulnerability scanning tools, which you may use, and that is available through the Trace Security CSO platform for you, the client, to use yourself and track your vulnerabilities, comment on your vulnerabilities, set up your own vulnerability scanning schedules, on-demand scans, the full gamut of what you would expect out of vulnerability scanning tool. I know that we do provide that.
Okay. And what does web application testing consist of, and is it required?
It was only required within the Core Plus section. What does it consist of? I apologize, that is not a question for me, so I can't necessarily speak to it. So I don't know 100% what that would be, but I'm relatively sure that it would be the same penetration and or vulnerability scannings that is specific to the web application.
And generally, that might include things that were on the OWASP top 10 list for application vulnerabilities, things like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, other attempts that hackers would utilize to try and manipulate a credit union's web applications.
All right. Somebody asked if a third-party audit is required annually.
Yes, and I would answer that the same way that I answered with the other third-party question. I highly recommend annual audits. I want to say that I was looking over the ICE requirements, and there was something in there about no more than 20 months between each audit review, according to NCUA. However, again, you want to make sure that you're not really kind of pushing up on that, and it's best to get the annual piece schedule, so that way you don't offset yourself. When you start looking at the 20-month, the 24 months is for every 2 years, and then you need to try and bob and weave in and out of those months, so to speak, to not hit that 20-month mark. Again, it's just safest to just do it annually, which would definitely be my recommendation. However, to be in compliance with NCUA, no more than 20 months for an audit.
Okay. Okay, next one is, how much should the board be involved in all of this? I understand they set the policy, but should they be more involved in understanding ICE and just the program itself?
I don't know, because that's another kind of a little difficult question to answer, because of I don't know how big is your board. Sometimes I work with CEOs of the credit union that I'm dealing with, who may also be, on the board, so the board is aware of what's going on with the audit. However, if we're talking just in kind of general terms, I don't know that the board actually needs to be fully aware of every last detail of ICE requirements. This could be something to hand over their way to kind of outline. These are sort of the expectations that we learned of at the Trace Security webinar, and these are the different things that we are doing. Here's some things that we may need to look at in terms of this webinar and training, so to speak. However, I also though recommend that you provide an annual information security report update packet to your board in that regard. So hopefully that answers that question.
Somebody asked what asset size you need to be for the Core Plus requirements. Jude, if you want to take that one.
Typically, I believe that's based more on the risk profile and the technology that the credit union has in place. So for instance, if your credit union has developed their own web application, rather than rely on a third-party sourced application, that may bring in a Core Plus requirement around web application testing. If there are wireless networks in use that are tied in with the corporate environment, that would bring in that requirement. So generally speaking, it would be based on the risk profile or the technology in use at the credit union.
Okay, and then what is the distinction between vulnerability assessments and vulnerability scanning? Do assessments include remediation efforts?
That's a bit more of the technical side question. I can tell you that a vulnerability assessment, in terms of how Trace Security provides one, is going to be a bit more of a comprehensive vulnerability assessment with a full report, recommendations for each one of the found or discovered vulnerabilities, and so forth. A vulnerability scan is something that is akin to, it's maybe a sister type of action that is performed, because again, Trace Security does not do monthly vulnerability scans per se. We provide the tools to be able to perform a monthly vulnerability scan. A vulnerability scan is included in a vulnerability assessment, but a vulnerability scan, in those terms, you're going to have those discovered vulnerabilities, and you're going to have to research those on your own in order to discover how to address each one of those vulnerabilities. But those tools are useful in tracking and understanding your vulnerability environment, and also catching any new vulnerabilities which may pop up. Vulnerabilities pop up on a nearly daily basis for most applications. For anyone that has ever seen the update button in Google Chrome, that is because you need to update your software, because there are more than likely vulnerabilities which are discovered, which Google is pushing down to you in order to fix those vulnerabilities. I can't think of how many times per month I need to click that update button. It's nothing against Google. I love Google. I use Google Chrome. It's my browser of choice. But as I said, vulnerabilities pop up all throughout the year. So just doing a vulnerability scan and relying on the vulnerability assessment on an annual basis is not healthy, let's say, for your organization. And from an information security standpoint, you should have a monthly to quarterly vulnerability scan program as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Somebody asked if we have a recommendation for patch management software.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think that I necessarily do. Offhand, there are a few that many of my clients utilize. One that springs off the top of my head is Manage Engine. However, the WSUS, Windows Server Update Service, I think is what it stands for. That's a native Windows patch management tool that can be utilized just within the server itself in order to manage Windows updates, but not so much for third parties. And that's all I think I necessarily have on that question.
Okay, and then what is the required frequency of the third-party external penetration tests?
I don't know if there's an official requirement, but it's another one that would definitely come recommended from Trace Security as an annual penetration test, an annual exercise of that particular service.
Okay, and then for internal and external penetration testing, do we recommend that to change vendors over time, like such as every 3 years?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Would we recommend changing vendors every 3 years?
Vendors
or like
for
vendors for penetration testing?
It is a very common best practice to switch vendors from time to time to ensure that that there is no again bias or I don't necessarily want to use the term lazy or lackadaisical. However, if you're getting nothing but good results back, you may want to get a fresh set of eyes on a given service. Every 3 years, sure. Every 3 to 5 years, I think, is another industry best practice for something of that nature.
Okay. And are vulnerability assessments required to be quarterly or annually for a credit union over $50 billion in assets?
I think at over 50 billion, you would be, looking at quarter vulnerability assessments for sure. Probably daily vulnerability scans at something of that size. Yeah.
And what would we need to do to set up a VPN configuration check? I'm guessing like what a third party would need from them to perform that.
Oh, I thought that was a Jude question for sure, because you just need to talk to Jude, right? Yeah, set that up.
The VPN configuration reviews, the setup of that's something that I need to provide offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it would depend on the VPN they use and how often are the requirements for the small credit union program? Like how often do they have to meet those requirements? I do believe that is annually.
Let's see, bear with me 1 second. I don't have the requirements up in front of me, or if I can remember. Do you mind backing up to that slide, Marissa?
Sure.
I don't recall all of them off the top of my head, so I don't want to miss one or misspeak.
Which one was that?
I think we need to go one more there. Small institution. So the risk assessment and the audit, annual. Network assessment, annual. Penetration test, annual. Security awareness training. The videos and quizzes, I think those are just something that we could provide through Trace Education, and there is no timeline necessarily for those, but that would be something to track and make sure that folks are completing on whatever timeline that you have set out, with no more than annual as that target. It's very similar. I Know Before is a very popular platform, and so anyone that ever has been through Know Before more than likely knows that you can assign out videos and quizzes and so forth to folks, and Trace Education is very similar. In that regard, you can set up deadlines and so forth for them. So if you have a particular series of videos and quizzes that you want to assign out to someone, I would set that for no more than a year. So make sure that everybody's at least taking some sort of a training on an annual basis in that regard for the scoop. Remote social engineering, phishing and vishing. Phishing, I would say you might want to be looking at biennial, twice a year, or maybe even quarterly, possibly the same with vishing. Disaster recovery plan tabletop, around annually.
And does the NCUA require this mission testing even if they don't use cell phones at their credit union?
That is a good question. I would really almost want to say that that's a case-by-case basis in my view. Even if they don't use cell phones at the credit union, are we saying that there are no corporate devices that are issued by the credit union, but we still have folks that utilize their cell phone as a BYOD scenario? They still get their email or so forth on the phone. If it's either one of those, corporate and or BYOD, then yes, we probably want to go ahead and do this smishing test, because those folks are vulnerable. We have corporate information that is on those phones. If we do not allow email, we do not have corporate devices or anything of that nature, then no, I don't believe that we necessarily needed to utilize the smishing test in that regard. But in today's day and age, I'm going to be pretty shocked if we don't even have BYOD most CEOs want to have their email on their phone, right?
Right. Somebody asked if you could explain what vishing means.
Phishing, absolutely, yes. It's just a video call. To bring it to a common parlance, I'd like to talk to you about your car's extended warranty. Phone calls that we all get, right? That's a phishing scheme.
Yeah, phishing is it's voice phishing.
Yes, yeah. So that's where they're trying to get your personal details over the phone. Smishing is over text, and phishing is over email. So that's the phish, email, vish, voice or phone, and then smish, text, or SMS text is where smishing comes from.
And let's see. Someone asked if you've ever encountered any automatic cybersecurity tools in the financial environment. It doesn't say for what, just automatic cybersecurity tools.
Well, that's a pretty wide array of tools, but yes, absolutely. For any particulars, I don't know that I could, answer one right off the top of my head, but I mean, even a SIEM solution, that's SIEM, Security Incident and Event Manager application, IBM QRadar, Alien Vault, SolarWinds, I think, has got one, but I don't know of too many people that are using SolarWinds after a couple of years ago. Maybe you are. It's fine. It's perfectly fine. I think it was just an incident that they had. But those are examples of an automated detection tool for event and audit logs. So again, it's a very broad question that I'm not 100% sure how to answer.
Okay. This one says their firewall and VPN configuration reviews have to be done by a third party on supposedly an annual basis. And they said previously they were documenting their internal quarterly reviews for those things versus getting a third party to review them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they're, I guess, seeing if that's still.
Yes. Once again, I would always recommend to have a third party within. It should be in Core Plus, I think, if not Core. VPN configure review and remote access assessment. Those were the two.
Yeah, and those are specifically third party requirements.
Yes, I would definitely make sure of that. Again, just so that way we're making sure that we have the bias removed. Again, it does depend on your size and complexity, I believe, even with these two. But I highly recommend for almost everything that you have a third party perform it, with the exception of some of the training or I think the ACE tool, it can be a self-assessment. Although having some professional guidance, if you're unfamiliar with it, is also good. The remote social engineering, like the smishing and so forth, you can actually set those up on your own, because that's just whether or not folks click on a given link or something along those lines, those can be done on your own. Vulnerability scans can be done on your own, for example. But again, anything where we're talking about somebody needs to review, how are we doing things as a credit union? What does our internal processes actually look like? What does the evidence say that we are doing? That all those things should necessarily be reviewed by a third party to eliminate bias. Hopefully that answers that question.
All right, so we got one that says, are the videos and quizzes job specific? And I can actually answer that. We're actually developing our some additional videos and content for that right now. And we have a little bit more of a long-term plan to create those. They're currently more based around the end users, but they will, we are planning to develop and have some dedicated for the IT staff, for administration, and things like that. It's not currently available, but we do have that planned for this year. All right, and someone asked, should code scanning be part of vulnerability scanning?
That sounds like a little bit more of a technical question that might be outside of my wheelhouse, so I'd have to ask for additional clarification on what they mean when what the author of that question means when they say code scanning.
Okay. And then someone else asked if ICE would consider patch scans and vulnerability scans to be the same or different.
Typically in common parlance, colloquially, let's say when we say patch scans, usually you are talking about vulnerability scans. Yes. But when from a technical standpoint, there are always vulnerability scans. Now you might be talking about a given patch management program, which is making sure that everything within its environment is up to a certain patch level. Now that could be something when you're talking that you're talking about a patch scan, but that's just making sure that there are certain patches that are that are there. But typically that's updated for a certain level, and that's fetched with all the interconnectedness that we have in the Internet of Things today. As an example, Manage Engine is going to know that your Google Chrome browser, that the latest version of it is x.x.x, and that was released on a given year, and Y X host out of your whole organization are not on that level of Chrome browser. So you're going to just be able to kind of see that on a dashboard, and there's not really a whole lot of scanning that's really necessary. So hopefully that answers that question. Usually, like I said, when we're talking about patch scanning, it's vulnerability scanning, and that is checking to see if there's something that is out there and that it has already been addressed by a given patch from the manufacturer, and that's known by your vulnerability scanning tool. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, and if their credit union is performing a full business continuity failover annually and updating their continuity plan annually, do they still need to perform tabletop testing?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
If the credit union is already performing a full business continuity failover annually and updating their continuity plan at least annually, do they still need to do a tabletop?
I would have to ask back, when they do the full failover test, is it just the technicians that are doing the failover test and reporting up to management, or is management involved in that test and doing their role playing their responsibilities within that process? If that answer is yes, then you're doing a practical and tabletop at the same time. Everyone is aware and participating in that. So there's no need for the additional tabletop test in that scenario. If the answer is no, just the tech guys in the background are just failing over the lines and testing the backups to make sure that we can recover, and logging into a given server to make sure that it comes up with the screen and the application is up and running, and absolutely no one in management is involved in that and talking through any type of situations, then yes, I would recommend that you do a tabletop test, because once again, the tabletop test is more for the management awareness and the roles and responsibilities for those processes, where the practical test should be more for the technical guys. But they can be done at the same time, as I tried to lay out there in my response. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, and is there any regulation regarding the use of the ISE tool, or can they have their own assessment tool that they use in-house?
I would recommend going with NCUA's tool. That might be a better question for your particular examiner. I don't know if I can really speak on using something that's not NCUA based or recommended by the NCUA.
And what about software and equipment supply chain audit requirements? Is that something included in our IT audits?
We do cover supply chain considerations within our risk assessments and audits, yes.
And will you just one more time go over the tabletop testing that you would recommend for the small ones, this under the SCOOP program?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll just kind of walk you through typically what I would expect of a small institution when I do a tabletop test with a small institution. And that is, we need to get anyone and everyone who's defined within your disaster recovery plan as part of the recovery team together on this tabletop test. When we do the test, and that may even include your managed service provider from a small institution standpoint, Dell Secure Works, let's say, or what have you. We're going to get everyone involved on the phone call. It's going to be around about an hour, 30 minutes to an hour. And we're going to have a given recovery scenario. And that could be from a ransomware event that leads to a recovery scenario. That could be an earthquake, tornado, natural event, something along those lines. Just almost anything that you want to pick that's going to physically or logically wipe out a whole line of your production. We may have to fail over to disaster recovery, and we start from the beginning. This is your disaster recovery plan. Where do we start, right? Well, we start here at recovery procedures, section 4. Okay. Well, it's happened. Susan, go. Right, you're the person as defined as the leader of the disaster recovery team. Go. Where do we go from there? And Susan walks us through all of her steps, and she says, at this point, I hand it off to X, or whatever. We contact the MSP, and the MSP says, all right, at this point, we would start recovering from backups and so forth. And again, it's think of it as, tabletop, Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. We just talk through the campaign. How are we going to respond to all these different things? And we're just doing it so that way, again, we have the management awareness. We identify any gaps. Well, maybe instead of at this part where we say we should communicate with this person, we need to do this. Oh, hey, well, instead of sitting around and waiting for the MSP to do something, maybe this is a time that we need to go down to section 4 section 4 part B of member communication. We need to do that a little bit earlier, right? We feel we need to do that a little bit earlier. Those types of things is what we're looking at in a tabletop exercise. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, I'm going to give everyone just a couple seconds. We reached the end of what people had submitted, but in case anyone has anything that they're currently typing, I'm going to give everyone just a second.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it looks like that was it. I am going to go ahead and put us back on that last slide, just in case. If y'all have any additional questions, you are absolutely able to just email them to us or to Jason directly. And we're happy to answer any other questions you have about this. I will be sending out the NCUA statement document and our roadmap documents for you guys, and just to help you out with what needs to be done this year, and hopefully help you guys get some organization on the new requirements. And we will also be sending out these slides and recording along with those documents for you guys. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.